Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Paul's Sports Takes. Earlier this afternoon, the World Indoor Championships in Athletics wrapped up in Glasgow, Scotland. They were phenomenal. It was such a good 3 days of track and field. Lived up to basically every expectation you possibly could have had coming into it. And today we're going to talk about every single event. I have 4.5 pages of notes to get through, so this could be a long one. It felt like every single event basically had so much to talk about, and it would feel like I was doing a disservice to the athletes that competed in it if I just kind of glossed over it. So we're going to give every event the respect it deserves, and let's get into it. So I broke this down into each of the 3 days, and just a heads up, there were some events that had heats and semifinals and stuff on different days, so I'm counting everything on the day that the final was. So, like, some of the distance races had the heats on day one, but the finals today on day three. So, I'm going to talk about those in the day three section. The very first final in this World Indoor Championships was the women's shot put on Friday morning, and it got started off with an absolute bang. Yamisi Ogunleye from Germany threw 2019 in the first round. That is a 62 centimeter personal best in the first round of the World Indoor Championships. That is crazy. That is so clutch. That mark would remain the leading mark up until the fourth round, where we saw Sarah Mitten of Canada move into gold. She threw 2020 on her fourth throw, so she moved ahead of Ogunleye by a single centimeter, and then she would end up bettering that throw and throw 2022 in the sixth round after she had already had the gold medal wrapped up. So it was a really solid performance from Mitten. Great series from her as well. Her first global title, indoors or outdoors. Chase Jackson, formerly Chase Ely, she got married this offseason. So reigning two-time outdoor world champion. She threw 1967 and got the bronze medal here. But she said after the meet that she was dealing with a groin injury that she suffered in kind of like warm-ups / shakeouts the day before the competition. So the fact that she was still able to put up 3 marks of 1950 plus and still secure a bronze medal while dealing with that injury is very impressive. Next up, we had the women's high jump, and before this one even got started, the American champion Vashti Cunningham ended up scratching, so she did not jump in this event, which kind of stinks because she had cleared 197 earlier this year, and 197 would have gotten her silver, so she definitely had potential to medal if she would have been healthy, but obviously it's an Olympic year, so health moving into the outdoor season is the main priority. The prohibitive favorite coming into this event was Yaroslava Mahuchik. She is the reigning world outdoor champion from Budapest last year, as well as the reigning world indoor champion from Belgrade in 2022. She has the world lead this year, but just behind her is Nicola Olaschlagers of Australia. Mahuchik's season's best is 204. Olaschlagers is at 203. Mahuchik opened up jumping really well. She got first-time clearances at 1.92 m, 1.95 m, and 1.97 m. While at 1.97 m, Olaschlagers failed on her first attempt, and then she got a second attempt clearance. So Mahuchik was ahead on countback, moving into 199. And then Mahuchik, she was not able to clear 1.99 m, which was very surprising because it feels like it's crazy, but that's how good she is, that feels like an automatic height most times. But it just wasn't clicking for her today. And then Ola Schlagers ended up clearing 199 on her third attempt. So it was a super clutch jump from her to secure her first global title, indoors or outdoors. She attempted either 201 or 202 after clearing 199, but was not able to clear it. But that really just would have been icing on the cake of already winning a world title. The bronze medal in this competition went to Leah Apostolovsky of Slovenia, who equaled her personal best at 1.95 m. The men's shot put is next up on the list. Let's talk about it. Ryan Krauser, coming into this meet, he's obviously by far the greatest men's shot putter of all time, but the single accomplishment he does not have on his mantle is a world indoor title. The closest he came was a silver in Belgrade in 2022, where he finished just behind a phenomenal day from Darlin Romani. I think Romani was like 22:51, and I think Krauser threw 22:44 or something that day. He would end up finally adding that world indoor title to his mantle today. His first round throw was 22.36, which won the competition by 29 centimeters. But then obviously, because he's Ryan Krauser, he threw a lot further than that. He had 5 legal throws in this one. 4 of them were over 22 meters. 1 of them was 22 meters on the dot. And his 4 throws over 22 meters. If Ryan Krauser did not already hold the world record, this is where those throws would rank on the all-time world indoor list. 22.36 would be 6th all-time. 22.51 would be 4th all-time. And then his final 2 throws were 22.77 and 22.69. Both of those are farther than anyone else has ever thrown indoors. So either one of those would be the world record if he didn't already have it at 22.82. And then also 22.80 2 weeks ago at USA Indoors. Silver medal went to Tom Walsh of New Zealand. It was a really impressive series from him. He had throws of 22.07, which was his best on the day, and then he also had a 22.03 and a 21.92 in there. And then Leonardo Fabri from Italy backed up his silver outdoors last year with a bronze indoors. His best mark was 21.96, and then he had another mark of 21.82. Probably the most surprising result of the men's shot put final was that Rajendra Campbell, who exactly 1 week before this men's shot put final, threw 22.16 in Madrid. He fouled each of his first 3 throws, and so he didn't make the top 8 cutoff after 3 rounds because he didn't have a legal mark. So a guy who is, I think, 3rd on the world list this year, ended up in dead last, which was very surprising because, like I said, his 22-plus meter throw was literally just last week. The women's pentathlon also took place on day 1, and this event started off with a very unfortunate injury where Maria Vicente of Spain, an incredibly promising young athlete, she won the first event, which was the 60-meter hurdle. She won it by a pretty significant margin. And then early on in the high jump, which is the second event of the pentathlon, she was doing her approach for one of her jumps. I think it was like 170 or something. So it was one of the early on jumps. And her leg kind of just buckled underneath her. And she, like an hour after it happened, she posted on Instagram that she had completely ruptured her Achilles, which is just so, so terrible because obviously a ruptured Achilles to anyone is horrible. But in an Olympic year, in a year where she has such a promising career ahead of her and she had so much she could potentially prove on the world stage this year, to see that happen to her, your heart really just goes out to her right now. In the rest of the pentathlon, though, it was pretty much a 2-woman race for most of the event between Noor Wiets of Belgium, the defending champion from 2022, and Saga Vannanen of Finland. They were just neck and neck throughout all of the first 4 events. And then it come down to the 800, and Wiets had a significantly better PB in this than Vannanen did. So you kind of felt like she was going to win going into the 800, and she did end up winning. In doing so, Noor Wiets became the first woman in the history of the World Indoor Championships to successfully defend her title in the pentathlon. Vannanen, really good day from her. I'm pretty sure she set a big PB. And then finally, the bronze medal went to Sophie Doctor of the Netherlands, who had to run a 4-second personal best in the 800, which is the final event. She had to run a 4-second personal best to remain in 3rd, and I think she ended up staying in 3rd by like 20 or 25 points. So if she didn't have the best day of her life in the 800, basically, she would not be a world indoor medalist. But it was just a really strong showing from her when all the chips were on the table and it really mattered most. The final event of the first day was probably the single most hyped up event coming into it. That is, of course, the men's 60 meters. The showdown between Christian Coleman and Noah Lyles with a splash of Akeem Blake in there as well. Lyles came into this one as the world leader at 6:43, the U.S. champion over Christian Coleman head-to-head in Albuquerque a couple weeks ago. Despite Noah Lyles' recent success, though, he was by no means a conclusive favorite coming into this one, given the fact that Christian Coleman is the world record holder in the event, and he just has so many consistently spectacular times. This was definitely far from being decided until they stepped on the line for the final. The progressions throughout the heats, the semis, and then the finals for each of them. Coleman ran 6:49 in his heat, which was the fastest time out of anyone, 6:43 in the semis, which was also the fastest time out of anyone, and then 6:41 in the final, which obviously won him the gold medal. Noah Lyles ran 6:57 in his heat, which he won the heat pretty comfortably, but he didn't necessarily look great doing it. He ran 6:47 in the semis, which looked a lot better. And then he ended up running 6:44 in the final to finish 300ths of a second behind Coleman. It was honestly a pretty solid start for Lyles in the final, but he just the gap was there because despite it being a solid start by his standards, Christian Coleman is still just that much better than him. So Coleman was basically ahead of him from the gun. And Noah Lyles, unlike at USA Nationals, he didn't start closing that gap until the last 3 or 4 meters maybe, and the gap was not closing obviously as fast as it needed to. If this was like a 70 or a 75-meter race, maybe Lyles would have been able to catch Coleman, but Coleman did end up winning by a relatively 300th of a second in the 60 is a somewhat comfortable margin, and he just continues to cement his place as probably the greatest 60-meter runner ever. But I feel like there are some people that are looking at Lyles losing this race and then kind of thinking oh, okay, so his market improvement in the 60 this year doesn't really matter that much when it comes to outdoors, which I absolutely think it will. He went from 6:51, I want to say he ran last year, maybe 6:52 or something, to running 6:43 once and then 6:44 twice. That is a massive improvement in the weakest part of his race. So he is still going to be an absolute force coming out as the defending world champion in the 100 and the 200 and the 4x1, and as we'll talk about later, the 4x4 potentially. We'll see. The bronze medal went to Akeem Blake of Jamaica, and he was just had a super consistent series throughout each round. And then he ended up running 6:46 in the final, just behind Noah Lyles for that bronze. On day 2, we got started off with the men's long jump, where we saw Miltiadis Tentoglu defend his world indoor title from 2022 with a mark of 8:22, which was the best mark. It was tied for the best mark. He ended up winning on countback over Mattia Furlani of Italy. And Tentoglu is just such an insanely good championship performer. He's like the Soufiane El Bakali of long jump. He has now, in the last couple of years, he won the gold medal in Tokyo, won World Indoors in 2022, got a silver in Eugene in 2022 outdoors, won last year in Budapest outdoors, and now has won this year indoors. So if he can kind of cap this stretch off with the gold in Paris this year, it will be incredibly impressive. Tentoglu and Furlani both hit their mark of 8:22 in the very first round. And then in the second round, Tentoglu went 7:94 to Furlani's 7:91. So Tentoglu was ahead on countback from the start. And then in the fourth round, Furlani was jumping before Tentoglu. So in the fourth round, Furlani goes out to 8:10, which now puts him ahead on countback. And then Tentoglu immediately answers with 8:15, which put him back ahead on countback. That is a lead he would never relinquish. In the fifth and sixth rounds, Tentoglu jumped 8:11 and then 8:19 just to give him 3 marks better than Furlani on countback. So they did end up with the same jump, but Tentoglu was the more consistent, better jumper on the day. Furlani in the sixth round had an absolutely massive foul, where it was massive by the means of he was 15 centimeters over the board, but it was also 860 plus. Even taking it back the 15 centimeters, if you would have been able to make the board, it would have been enough to win gold. But, that's just not how long jump works sometimes. So it was a big jump. It was cool to watch, but ultimately it did not matter. For the bronze medal, that went to Kerry McLeod of Jamaica. He ended up jumping 8:21 in round 5. So the podium here was separated by literally 1 centimeter. So that is a very, very good comp. Next up was the women's pole vault, and we saw a bit of an upset here. The first kind of shocking part was Sandy Morris, defending 2-time world indoor champion. She went out at 4:65, so she ended up in 5th place. But then probably the more surprising part is that Katie Moon, reigning 2-time world outdoor champion, she got the silver behind Sandy Morris in Belgrade in 2022 indoors. She also won the gold in Tokyo. She ended up getting the bronze in this one. She had a first-time clearance at 4:65, but then it took 2 attempts for her to clear 4:75, and then she could not make it over 4:80, which I think her season's best on the year is only 4:80. So she's been dealing with, I believe she said it's an Achilles injury the last month or so. So that's kind of been affecting her jumping. But still, it was kind of surprising to see her not compete up to the standard we've come to expect from her at championship level meets. The silver medal went to Eliza McCartney of New Zealand. She missed her first attempt at 465, which you might have thought was a bad omen, but apparently not, because she ended up with the silver medal. But she got a first-time clearance at 475. She ended up clearing 480 on her final attempt, so that's what pushed her ahead of Katie Moon. But then when it came to 485, she missed the first attempt and then passed, missed 2 attempts at 490, and she was forced to pass because of the gold medalist, Molly Cottery, of Great Britain, so winning on her home turf. The winning move for her was a second-time clearance of 480. She ended up not clearing 485 on either of her 3 attempts, but she ended up taking the gold over McCartney on countback because they had the same amount of misses coming into 480, but then, like I said, she got 480 on her second attempt, and McCartney needed all 3 attempts to clear 480. In the men's triple jump, we saw world indoor record holder and reigning world outdoor champion Hugues Fabrice Zango of Burkina Faso win his first world indoor title with a mark of 17:53. This competition got off to a really hot start when Yasser Mohamed Tricky of Algeria went 17:35 in the first round, which is a very impressive mark. Really kind of set the bar for Zango because I believe that was like 10 centimeters further than his season's best coming into this meet. So he knew in the first round he really had to step it up if he wanted to get that gold medal. And step it up he did. His second and third round jumps were 17:33 and 17:31, so just behind Tricky's mark of 17:35. But then in round 5, he jumped out to 17:53, which would be enough to win the gold. Tricky scratched his final 3 jumps of the competition, so I believe he was dealing with some sort of injury because especially after Zango goes out and takes the lead, if he wasn't hurt, there would not be any reason for him not to jump, I would assume. So it's understandable because A, he still has a silver medal, and B, it is an Olympic year. So risking injury in an indoor competition that has a fraction of the acclaim that the Olympics do, it is a completely understandable decision on Tricky's part. The bronze medal in this one went to Tiago Pereira of Portugal in the 6th round when he was sitting in 7th. He jumped 17:08 to catapult himself all the way up to 3rd. This next event ended up being maybe one of my favorites of the entire meet, and I am talking about the women's 3,000 meters. The odds-on favorite coming into this one was Gudaf Sagai of Ethiopia. Last year, we saw her shatter Faith Kipyegon's like 2-month-old world record in the outdoor 5,000, and she is the second fastest athlete of all time over the indoor 3,000. She had already run, I'm pretty sure she ran that second fastest time ever this year. She is just so crazy good, but not good enough to beat Ellie Purrier St. Pierre in this race. St. Pierre in this final with a time of 8:20.87 became the 3rd fastest athlete ever. It is the 4th fastest time in the history of the event. And she did all this almost 1 year to the day after giving birth, which is pretty crazy. This race was super fast and it strung out like immediately. And so we basically immediately saw like a 4 to 5 woman breakaway pack that eventually ended up being 4. And Sagai was leading for a wide majority of this race. She was leading from about the 1K mark up to about like 2,960 meters. I want to say that's about when St. Pierre passed her on the home straightaway. And St. Pierre closed in 29:76 for the last 200, which, if you don't know, is very fast for an indoor 3,000. But St. Pierre's time was not the only historically notable one to occur in this race. So her time was the 4th fastest ever. Sagai's time was the 5th fastest ever. Beatrice Chepkoech of Kenya, who took the bronze medal, ran the 8th fastest time ever, and Jess Hull of Australia ran the 12th fastest time ever. Sagai also now holds 4 of the 7 fastest times in history in this event, which, I'm going to say it again, is pretty crazy. But if I'm Sagai after this race, I'm not super concerned because any time that it takes the 4th fastest time in the history of an event to beat you, you're kind of doing something right, especially when you were so close to it. Obviously, she probably thinks she could have left a little bit more for there at the end, but when you have a resume like Sagai's, I don't think she's losing that much sleep over this. On the complete opposite end of the distance racing spectrum was the men's 3,000 meters, because this one was super duper slow and incredibly tactical. Halfway through, so at the 1,500 mark, the top 11 were separated by 1.5 seconds, and Josh Kerr of Great Britain and Northern Ireland of Scotland, running basically in his hometown. He ended up winning the gold in this one, and he was in 10th place at the halfway mark. Josh Kerr, just like we saw him do in that indoor 2-mile record a couple weeks ago, he had a blisteringly fast last 600. He ran his last 600s, the last 3 laps on an indoor track, in a minute 22:25, which is, like I said, very, very fast. And he ended up winning this one pretty comfortably. The time was, like I said, it was pretty slow. It was 13 seconds slower than his PR, but that's kind of what happens when you get into championship distance racing. Is a lot of times they're more tactical like this. Seeing in a championship race the 4th, 5th, 8th, and 12th fastest times ever, like we saw in the women's race, is definitely an outlier. So this men's race was much more of what I was expecting. The silver medal went to Yard Nagoose, and he had a really, really nice finish in this one to overtake Seliman Barega over the final 50 to 40 meters. And so, obviously, Nagoose probably thought he had a chance to win this one. He probably absolutely did because his PB is like 7:28, I think, and the winning time was 7:43. But it's his first ever medal on the global stage, so I feel like he's probably happy with that no matter what. And then finally, Selwyn Barega, who Nagoose passed on the home straightaway, he did end up holding on for the bronze medal. In the women's 400, the first 2 rounds, there weren't really any surprises there. All the favorites that you would have expected to make it through to the final made it through to the final, and that was pretty much the 2 Dutch athletes in Femke Bol and Lieke Klaver, and then the 2 American athletes in Talitha Diggs and Alexis Holmes. So no surprises there. And then when it got to the final, Femke Bol did Femke Bol things, and she reset her own world record. She ran 49:17. Her final 200 was over 0.6 seconds faster than anybody else in the field. Lieke Klaver, her countrywoman, big props to her. She came through with the silver, but Femke Bol beat her by 0.99 seconds, which obviously it is a world record race. So to some extent, you would expect something like that. And there's only like 7 women all time that have broken 50 in the indoor 400. But still, winning a global championship by nearly a second in a sprinting event it's absurd. Alexis Holmes of the U.S. came through with the bronze medal. She almost was able to run down Lieke Klaver in the final straightaway, but Klaver held her off just enough. I think the final times were 50:16 for Klaver and 50:24 for Alexis Holmes, but that's still a big PB for her. And like I said, it's her first individual medal, so good for Alexis Holmes. One final closing statement on how absurdly dominant Femke Bol is when it comes to indoor 400. This race gave her 4 of the 6 fastest times in history, and 3 of those times have been set this year. I'm pretty sure all of them in the last month. So yeah, Femke Bol it's going to be very interesting to see what she does in the 400 hurdles outdoor this year, because she said she's only running the hurdles. She's not running the 400 flat outdoors. I'm pretty sure Sydney McLaughlin is also only running the 400 hurdles. I think she said she's not planning on trying to double in Paris. So that is going to be incredibly exciting. In the men's 400, the rounds, really the only surprises in the semifinals or the heats in this one were that neither of the 2 Americans in the event, the U.S. champion Brian Faust and then the U.S. runner-up Ja'Cory Patterson, go Gators, neither one of them made it out of the heats. They represented the first 2 out. Faust ran 47:11, and Ja'Cory Patterson ran 47:04 and missed out on a time qualifier by 0.002 seconds. And it stings so much more for Ja'Cory Patterson because he had a top 2 auto qualifier spot locked up and he didn't run through the line. And he ended up getting past, and he lost by that 2,000th of a second. And that was the difference between him not making it to the semifinals and him making it to the semifinals. In the semifinals, you could really tell the 2 leaders out of the pack were Karsten Warholm, the 400-meter hurdles outdoor world record holder, and then Alexander Doom of Belgium. They looked like the class of the field in their heats and in their semis, and that would prove to be the case in the finals as well. Karsten Warholm did his usual thing where he just runs as fast as he possibly can for the first 300 and then hopes he has something left in the tank for the final 100. Usually he does. In this race, he did. It's just Alexander Doom had more left in the tank. He overtook Warholm with, it was like 10 to 15 meters left, maybe. Doom ends up running in the low 45s and breaks a national record for Belgium, which is very impressive considering Belgium, for as small of a country as they are, has a very impressive 400-meter history. So he broke their national record. He also had PB in the semifinal, so it was back-to-back PBs for him. Warholm comes up just short of that first medal, or first gold medal, I should say, in either of the 400 flat races without hurdles, but still getting a silver on the second day of your season, because the first race he had ran all year was the heats the day before. It's still pretty impressive to see from him. The bronze medal went to Rashid McDonald of Jamaica, who PB'd in every single round, and then he dropped half a second off of his PB to secure that bronze medal. Really impressive stuff from him. I feel like I almost don't even need to talk about the men's 60-meter hurdles because you guys already know what happened. Grant Holloway ran some of the fastest times in history and beat everyone by a country mile. Okay, I will talk about it more because Grant Holloway is awesome. Look at this picture of us. In his heat, Grant Holloway ran 7:43, which is like the easiest 7:43 you'll ever see. In the semifinals, he ran 7:32, which is a time I'm pretty sure only two men in history not named Grant Holloway have ever ran. And he's ran that like 6 or 7 times at this point. And then in the finals, he ends up running 7:29, which ties his old world record. So now he has now run 7:29 3 times. Nobody else has ever ran that. He's also ran 7:27 in Albuquerque a couple weeks ago. His heat time is the tied ninth fastest time in world history. His semifinal time is the tied third fastest time in world history. And his final time is the tied second fastest time in world history. The things Grant Holloway can do over 60-meter hurdles is crazy. He had, in the entire world this year, Grant Holloway ran the 7 fastest times in the world. Let that sink in. There were a couple surprises in the rounds of this race, especially in the semis. You saw Wilhelm Belocian of France and Jason Josephs of Switzerland, who had, I think they had the third and fourth fastest PBs coming into this event, and they also ran really well in the heats. They both were eliminated in their second semifinal, so that was kind of surprising to see. When we got to the final, we saw Lorenzo Simonelli of Italy take the silver medal in a national record time of 7:43, followed up by Just Quaumathy of France, who ran 7:47. Somewhat shockingly, Trey Cunningham of the United States, who had the second fastest PB in the field at 7:38. I believe he had ran 7:39 at some point this year already. He had to settle for sixth place in 7:53, which was kind of surprising. In winning this final, it secured a full 10-year win streak for Grant Holloway, because the 10-year anniversary of his last loss in the 60-meter hurdles is coming up in like 2 weeks. But he has said this is obviously the last race of his indoor season. So that will reach 10 years, which is one of the wildest stats, especially in a race like the 60, where there can be so much variance in a start or a reaction time or hitting a hurdle. But Grant Holloway just has a perfect start every time. I've probably watched him run like 15 60-meter hurdles races over the last 2 or 3 years. I truthfully don't think I've ever seen him hit a hurdle. He is just so, I'm trying to think of more adjectives to describe him, but you don't want to get too fancy with this. He's just really, really good. The final of day 2 was the women's 60 meters, and this one, oh boy, I was hyped for this one. In the heats, you saw Julian Alfred and Eva Svoboda, two of the favorites, run just dominant 7:02s. They both won their heats by like a tenth of a second, basically. They looked great. And then Aaliyah Hobbs of the United States, probably the third member of that favorite group, she ran 7:07 in her heat, and it looked like she had to work a little bit harder for that than Svoboda did or Alfred did for much quicker times. That was something kind of to keep an eye on. And then you move on to the semifinals. And in semifinal number 1, Eva Svoboda went 6:98. Whew, that is fast. That is very fast. I think that puts her in the top 20 all time, I want to say. Yeah, 698 is crazy. It broke her PB by a hundredth of a second from a couple years ago. So she hits a lifetime best in the semifinals. Julian Alfred ran a very easy 703 in the semis. So Alfred, I would say, is still the favorite moving into the final. But Svoboda, it looked like she still had more left in the tank, even with that 698. And her start is just so wildly good that could be theoretically, it could have been, I should say, it could have been the difference in the final. In Aaliyah Hobbs's semifinal, she won her heat in 704, but then she ran into the crash pad at the end of the track, and she kind of came off the track slowly, and you were kind of concerned. But then she said everything seemed okay, so she got to the starting line, in the final, and she was like doing her, how sprinters do their like little like jumping up and down, just kind of like getting loose, getting ready to feel themselves and whatnot. And she like all of a sudden she like jumped up, and then she came down and she was in immense pain on her left leg, and she ended up needing to be taken off the track in a wheelchair. And it just absolutely sucks to see that, because she is the second fastest athlete in world history, tied with Julian Alfred at 694. And she is just such a great competitor, especially after what we saw happen with Vicente in the pentathlon the day before. It's just, man, injuries suck, especially injuries like that happen at the World Championships, like out on the biggest stage. Losing that opportunity to compete is just terrible. In the actual final, though, the start for Svoboda, she needed it to be absolutely phenomenal, and because Alfred's top end speed is significantly better than Svoboda's, so her final 30 is significantly better. But Svoboda, her big shot was getting a big gap to open up, kind of like what Coleman did to Noah Lyles. Um, but the gap was not as big as she needed it to be. Alfred ended up running 698 to win. Svoboda got the silver in 7 flat. So it is unfortunate. It's always unfortunate to see people run faster in the semifinal than they do in the final, especially when you look at, wow, so 698 was what Svoboda ran in the semifinal. 698 was Alfred's winning time. Like that kind of stinks to see for her. But really big props to Julian Alfred for this one. It is the first ever medal at the Olympics or either of the World Championships for St. Lucia. So big props to them. And then for Svoboda, it is her first individual medal at a World Championship or Olympics. And lastly, the bronze medal went to Zainab Dasso of Italy. She ran a really good race. She ended up coming in at 7:05, just ahead of Zoe Hobbs in New Zealand, who for the second race in a row ran an Oceanian record. She ran 7:06. But it was a really nice lean from Dasso to get her bronze medal. All right, finally, we are on to day 3. The first final of day 3 was in the women's triple jump, and in this final, we saw Thea LaFond of Dominica win her country's first ever gold medal. She jumped 15:01 in round 2, and she only needed 2 jumps the entire competition, because she, I think, in a situation similar to Tricky in the men's triple jump, it seemed like she might have been nursing some sort of injury. So it's good for her that her first mark was so spectacular. It's her first time ever clearing 15 meters, 15:01. And so she did not take any of her final 4 jumps, but it was still enough to win the gold medal. Leonis Perez Hernandez of Cuba took the silver medal with a really solid series. Her best jump was 14:90, but she also had jumps of 14:58 twice and 14:79. And then her 6th round jump was a really, really big foul. The bronze medal went to Ana Pelotero Campore of Spain. She also had a really solid series. Her best jump was 14:75 in round 5, but she also had jumps of 14:67 and 14:64. And in 4th place was Katura Orji of the United States. And I just feel so bad for Katura Orji, because she is one of the most consistent triple jumpers ever, you have to assume. But her record in major championships it's just so close, but yet so far away. Obviously, she got 4th today. Last year in Budapest, she was 9th. In Eugene, she was 6th. In Belgrade in 2022 indoors, she was 7th. She was 7th in Tokyo at the Olympics in 2021. She was 7th outdoors in Doha in 2019. She was 5th in Birmingham indoors in 2018. She was 4th at the Rio Olympics, and then she was 4th in Portland for the 2016 World Indoors. So she's just been knocking at the door of that podium for 8 years now. And, you know, I'm rooting for her more than I am rooting for anyone else in this event when it comes to the Olympics this year because she deserves a medal so badly. The men's high jump final was somewhat disappointing in a way, if that's fair to say. The big three that I kind of talked about in my season preview video of Mumtaz Barshim, John-Marc Tamberry, and Javon Harrison, all three of them were not competing this year at the World Indoors, but the podium of this one ended up going to the three athletes that I mentioned as kind of the three to watch outside of them. So I'm feeling pretty good about myself right now. The world champion ended up being Hamish Kerr of New Zealand. He ended up clearing 236 for a new world leader, and he had this competition wrapped up before he had a single miss. He had first time clearances at 2 meters 15, 220, 224, 228, and 231. Shelby McEwen of the U.S., who had the silver medal, had a first time clearance at 215, passed on 220, first time clearance at 224, but then took 2 attempts to clear 228, and then failed twice on 231, passed up to 234, and failed to clear 234. So he was out before Kerr really missed a jump. And then Sung-Kyak Woo of South Korea, he had a first time clearance on 220. His last clearance was a second time clearance on 228, same with Shelby McEwen. He did not pass up to 234. He had 3 attempts at 231, missed all of them. So, yeah, it was just a dominant performance for Hamish Kerr. His clearance at 236 was on a third attempt. So it was on, like, regardless of what happens, pretty much the last jump of the competition. And he goes over 236 to, I believe, equal his indoor Oceanian record, I want to say, but don't quote me on that, and win the world indoor title by a pretty significant margin. So the men's pole vault, man, oh man, this was stressful. Mondo Duplantis gave us all a teensy bit of a scare, I might say. He ended up winning the gold medal, as he always does. His highest clearance was 6:05 today, which is a new world lead. You know, there's like probably 10 men in history that have ever cleared 6:05 indoors, and it was by basically every measure an off day for Mondo. His first clearance, he came in at 565, cleared at first attempt, passed up to 585, and his first 2 attempts at 585 really didn't look that close. And then he ended up clearing 585 on his third attempt. So he was almost off the podium somehow, which would have broken my brain. And then he passed up to 595. And he got a second time clearance there, which was the highest. Nobody else cleared 595. So that's how he ended up winning the gold medal. Then he got a third time clearance on 605 to kind of cement that gold medal, give him a new world lead. And then he did go 3 attempts at 624, which would be the new world record, but he did not clear any of those. The silver medal went to Sam Kendricks, who jumped at every height from 550 up to 590 and did not miss a single one. So he was well ahead. He was 2 jumps ahead of Mondo going into 595. And then he failed on 595 twice. After Mondo cleared, he passed up to 6 meters, and he failed at 6 meters. So it was still a very solid competition for him. The bronze medal, somewhat surprisingly, went to Emmanuel Corrales of Greece. Really good for him. I believe this is his first medal on the world stage. It wasn't a super clean series from him. He had a miss at 550 on the first jump of the competition, and then he passed on 550 after one attempt up to 565, and then he needed a third time clearance basically on 565 to just stay alive. And then he ended up clearing 575 on the second attempt, first attempt clearance on 585, and that was enough for the bronze. I was very surprised to see Ernest John Obiena of the Philippines, bronze medalist in Eugene in 2022, silver medalist last year. Really, he's been pretty consistently the closest to Mondo across Diamond League meets and whatnot over the last 2 years. So it was very surprising to see him only clear 565 today, and I think he ended up in like 7th or 8th. The women's long jump was absolutely awesome. It was the first 3 rounds were a very back and forth contest between Monet Nichols and Tara Davis Woodhull, both of the United States. And then the last 3 rounds were Tara Davis Woodhull just going nuclear. So Nichols opened up at 375 to take the lead in round 1. And then the second round, Tara Davis Woodhull went 679 to move into the lead. And then in the third round, Renee Nichols went 683. And then like 2 jumps after that, Tara Davis Woodhull went 693 to move back into the lead. That is a lead she would not relinquish. In the final 4 rounds, Tara went 707, which would end up being the winning mark, 688, and then 703 in the final round. So she ended up with the 4 best jumps of the competition, but it really was a pretty intense back and forth battle for the first couple rounds. I do want to make sure to give big props to Monet Nichols winning her first global medal. And then the race for bronze in this run was also awesome. Third, fourth, fifth, and sixth were 678, 677, 675, 674. 4 places, third through sixth, were separated by 4 centimeters. And each one of those women had a couple other really big jumps in like the 660s, I believe. So it was just all around a great competition at the top and a great competition in the middle as well. That bronze medal would end up going home with Fatima Diami of Spain at 678. Okay, let's get into the men's 4x4 because this kind of surprisingly ended up being maybe the most talked about event of the entire World Championships, especially like, okay, so in the heats, the U.S. won their heat with a lineup of Paul Dedewo, Trevor Bassett, Matthew Bowling, and Chris Bailey. And none of those 4 really ran spectacularly outside of Chris Bailey, I would say, on the anchor leg, but they ran solidly enough. And so that was in the morning session of day 3. And then in between the morning session and the afternoon session, USATF released who would be running in the finals for their 4x4. And it was Ja'Cory Patterson, Matthew Bowling, Chris Bailey, and Noah Lyles. There were mixed reactions about this, to say the very least. This is my take on it. Noah Lyles, like it or not, there are some people I don't understand how they dislike him because, people want more money to be put into track. You get more money by getting more eyes on you. Nobody has gotten more eyes on the sport better since Usain Bolt retired than Noah Lyles has. So everything he is doing for the betterment of everybody in the sport. And it also helps that he's one of the best athletes we've ever seen. And so putting the face of track and field right now, like it or not, he is the face of global track and field. Putting him in a premier relay in the 4x4 World Indoor Championships, which is something he's talked about wanting to do at the Olympics this year because he wants to go for 4 medals. He wants to pull a Carl Lewis. I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea. I think the execution wasn't great because they took Trevor Bassett out to put him on, and I would have taken out Matthew Bowling to put Noah Lyles on and kept Trevor Bassett in because Trevor Bassett has ran 45 like flat almost indoors in the 400, and he's been really good pieces of outdoor 4x4 relay teams in the last couple of years. So I would have kept Trevor Bassett in, taken Bowling out. And then there were some people that were annoyed that Brian Faust, who was the U.S. champion in the indoor 400 this year, that he didn't make it onto the relay team, but he also ran 47-1 in the open 400. So would he have given you the best chance to win? I don't know. And now after the race, I think that there shouldn't really be any criticism about this move. If you want to say that it should have been Matt Bowling instead of Trevor Bassett, I get that. Because Noah Lyles split 45-68 in the finals, which is really good for someone who, A, has never ran an indoor 400 in his life, according to World Athletics at least. It says he has never ran an indoor 400 or 400-meter relay. And also, according to his World Athletics page, the last time he ran a 400 was, fun fact, I was there. It was last year at the Florida Relays where he ran a 4x4 and split 47 seconds. But he ran 45-68, and the U.S. did lose to Belgium. But here's the thing. It's not Noah Lyles' fault. I saw some people saying that he gave up ground on his leg, which he did not. He expanded their lead on the Belgians on the third leg by a tenth of a second. So by every facet you could look at, Noah Lyles did his job on this 400-meter leg. it was just kind of canceled out by Alexander Doom, the 400-meter indoor world champion, splitting 44.88 on the anchor leg for Belgium and running down Christopher Bailey, who also had a really good leg. Yeah, there's just not a ton you can do about that. That is just so crazy fast. And Lyles, like in the grand scheme of looking at the splits that the team ran, he does not stick out as being terrible. Patterson ran 45.97, but the first leg is always a little bit slower in 4x4s. Matt Bowling ran 45.63, so 500ths of a second faster than Lyles. And then Chris Bailey, he ran, like I said, he had a really good anchor leg. He ran 45.32. So I think that a lot of the hubbub about this, I understand the optics of feeling bad for Trevor Bass about getting taken out of the final. But really, I think people are making it out to be a much bigger deal than it actually is when it comes to the cold hard facts of Noah Lyles being in this race. With all that out of the way, I do want to mention that the Netherlands won bronze in this race in a national record time, so congratulations to them. The women's 4x4 was far less dramatic. The Netherlands, they opened up with Lieke Klaver, and Klaver put almost a full second on the entire field on the first leg. Quinera Hayes, who was the U.S.'s first leg runner, she was over 2 seconds behind Klaver at the first exchange, so that wasn't great. But Talitha Diggs and Alexis Holmes had really good legs on the second and fourth legs for the U.S. Diggs split 50.5 flat, and then Holmes was 50.49. So they both ran really well. But the two other runners for the U.S. split 52 plus. So that is kind of hard to overcome, especially when the Netherlands anchor leg is Femke Bol. And Femke Bol, she only split 50-54 for the anchor leg, but she could have gone so much faster if she needed to. It's just that the threat of Alexis Holmes running her down was not as great as it was in the mixed 4x4 outdoors last year. So, like, it ended up being pretty close, and it looks just looking at the results like we almost won. But I think if push comes to shove, Femke Bol was not losing that race. And then coming up behind the U.S. and the Netherlands for bronze was Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and a national record for them as well. The men's heptathlon was so much fun. Simon Ehammer of Switzerland won the 60 meters and the long jump by very significant margins, which is to be expected. Particularly, it's to be expected in the long jump, where he was the bronze medalist at Eugene in 2022, and he was the Diamond League champion last year. So, yeah, it makes sense that he took a very big lead after the first two events. But then he had kind of poor showings in the high jump. The high jump was just well under his standards, and then for the shot put, he's just not a great shot putter. But that ended up actually putting him, after a really strong start, he was behind after four events after the first day, behind Ken Mullings of the Bahamas. But then he opened up the second day of the heptathlon with wins in the 60-meter hurdles and the pole vault by, once again, pretty significant margins. So going into the 1K race, which is the final event of the indoor heptathlon, he had, on paper, a pretty significant lead. It was 153 points. But that did not tell close to the whole story, because in third place, Ken Mullings was still in second at this point, but his goose was pretty much cooked because he's not a great 1,000-meter runner. But in third place was Sander Skotheim of Norway. And he started off a little slow, but he absolutely crushed high jump, the 60-meter hurdles, and pole vault to move into third. And now he was within striking range because he is a phenomenal 1,000-meter runner. And so, looking at the stats moving into this final event, Ehammer was 153 points ahead, and Skotheim's PB in the 1,000 was 132 points better than Ehammer's. So, despite having a pretty big lead going into the final event, it was far from a foregone conclusion that Ehammer would win the gold. And in this 1,000-meter race, as expected, Skotheim and Johannes Erm of Estonia kind of pull away from the rest of the pack. And Skotheim sets a 4.5-second personal best. And you're like, okay, that's game over. And they didn't even, when they're showing like distance races, they don't really show the runners like in the back of the pack, even if they are the heptathlon leader at that point. So I didn't even know that Simon Ehammer set a 3.75 second personal best in the 1K as well. So Skotheim put out this massive personal best that I thought was like, okay, that gives him the win. And then Ehammer answered back with an almost identical personal best of his own, and he ended up winning by 11 points. And it's kind of like what we saw with Sophie Doctor in the pentathlon, where if he doesn't have by far the best 1,000-meter race of his life, he is not the gold medalist. For Doctor, it was the bronze medal, but he's not the gold medalist if he doesn't PB. If he would have just ran his original PB, which was I think 249 something. He ended up running 246. If he'd ran 249, he would have lost by like 20 or 30 points. So it is just such a massive clutch performance when he needed it most. And then the bronze medal went to the aforementioned Johannes Erm of Estonia. He was in the top 4 the entire competition. And then, like I said, he had a really big final 800. I think he came in like a second or two behind Skotheim in second place, and that was enough to move him ahead of Mullings to get him that bronze medal. The women's 60-meter hurdles was another phenomenal event where we saw another world record, this time from Devon Charlton, once again, like Femke Bol, breaking her own world record. In the heats in this one, there were a couple really fast times. Surprisingly, none of them necessarily ran by Devon Charlton. There were 5 women that ran sub 7.9 in the heats, led by Pia Slikszewska of Poland, running 780. But then you get to the semis, and Devon Charlton runs a absurdly easy 773, which is one of the fastest times in history. And you're just like, okay, yeah, she's breaking this world record. I said on my Instagram story after the semifinal, I'll put it right here. I said manifesting 765 for the final. You guys want to take a guess at what she ran in the final? That's right. She ran 765, just like I predicted. Paul Stradamus, I tell you guys. This final was never even close to being close. She just stormed away from the pack in the first 10 and then stayed ahead of everyone over all the hurdles, leaned to the line, got that world record by 200ths of a second. The silver medal went to Serena Samba Maella of France, who she won the 2022 World Indoor title, and Devon Charlton got silver. So they kind of just switched places for this one. In the semifinals, Samba Maella ran a French national record in 773. She followed it up with 774 in the finals. And then Slikszewska of Poland won the bronze medal, and it was a really, really impressive day for her, really consistent. She ran 780 in the heats, like I said. In the semifinals, she ran 778 to equal her PB. And then she ran 779 with a lean at the line to beat out Masai Russell for that bronze medal for her first world medal. All right, guys, just hold on a little bit longer. We've got 4 events left. I promise we are almost done. Men's 800. In the heats, the only 2 really significant things are that reigning world indoor champion Mariano Garcia looked really good. He had the fastest time in the heats. And then Noah Kibet, the reigning silver medalist, failed to qualify for the semifinals. So that was a little bit shocking, especially because Kibet has been running relatively well this indoor season so far. In the semifinals, we saw 2 very distinct types of heats. Bryce Hoppel won a incredibly fast semifinal in a time very close to a minute 45. And then Mariano Garcia won a second, much slower semifinal where he was basically front running the entire time and just dictating the pace to a T, and nobody decided to try and pass him. That semifinal ended up, the winning time was above 147, so it was like 2.5 seconds slower than the other semifinal. Moving on to the final, Mariano Garcia pretty much led this race from the starting gun to the last lap bell, but when they hit that 600-meter mark, everyone else moved past him, and he just had absolutely no response. He ended up in dead last. When it came to that final 200, we saw a signature, really great kick from Bryce Hoppel of the United States. He ended up winning the gold to claim his first world title. It was a similarly great kick from Andreas Kramer of Sweden. His final 200 was actually just ever so slightly faster than Hoppel's. Hoppel ran 26:29 and Kramer ran 26:27. So they were both very close over the final lap, but Hoppel started his kick from a little further ahead. So he ended up winning by about 0.3 of a second. Hoppe broke. He became the first man this year to break 145. He ended up finishing 144.92. Kramer was close behind him, and then Elliot Creston of Belgium. What a weekend for Belgium, I tell you. He ended up getting the bronze medal. In the women's 800, you saw the heats and semifinals shake out with little to no surprises. Gemma Reekie of Great Britain had the fastest time by a relatively significant margin in the heats. And then she had the fastest time by a much slimmer margin in the semifinals, because in the semifinals, Sige Daguma of Ethiopia ran a 1.3 second personal best in the semifinals. And that kind of, put us on notice that she might do something big. And she ended up doing something big in the final. She ended up winning in a relatively slow time of 2:01.90. But this was just an incredibly tactical race, especially compared to how fast the men's race ended up being. The first 500 was just everyone super clumped together, nobody really wanting to make that first move. And then the final 300 was a master class by Daguma. She ran this final 300 almost a full second faster than Gemma Reekie did. It ended up being 42.76 to 43.61. And a big part of that was that she closed her final 100 meters in 13:61. That is just ridiculously impressive for the final, where you've already got two races in your legs, 2 2/3 of a race, and then you're able to pull out something that fast over at the final 300, and then, like I said, more specifically, the final 100. Very, very impressive stuff from Daguma, and she could definitely be one to watch moving outdoors. Gemma Reekie was able to hold on for that silver medal, and then Noel Yarigo of Benin was able to come through with the bronze. In the men's 1500, the heats went exactly as you would have expected them to go, and then you get to the final, and it is kind of similar to the men's 3K, just a little bit faster, but there was still a less stringing out like we saw in the women's 3K, and it was a pretty big lead pack. Jordy Beamish, who ended up winning the gold medal for New Zealand, he was in 7th entering the final lap, but the gap between him and then Hobbs Kessler of the U.S., who was in first, was only 0.8 of a second. And then entering the final 100 meters, Beamish had only moved up to 6th. And then he closes this final 100 meters in 12.78 seconds. The next fastest time out of anyone in the field for this final 100 was Cole Hawker of the U.S., who has a notoriously great kick, and he only managed 13:41. And it really looked like, so Hobbs Kessler was leading for a majority of this race. 20-year-old from the U.S., he turns 21 in like a week or two. And he was leading for majority of the race, but then Cole Hawker made his move with about 150 left, and it really looked like Cole Hawker was going to be able to run away with this one. And then just kind of out of the corner of your eye, you see Jordy Beamish coming up from way in the back and way on the outside, and he just comes up flying. Like I said, closes in 12:78, which is well over half second faster than anyone else in the field. He ends up winning this race by a relatively comfortable margin. So it's very impressive stuff for a guy that is primarily known as a steeplechaser, but it is also relatively impressive for a 2-3 finish from Cole Hawker and Hobbs Kessler, both of them pretty young athletes, and it is both of their first global medals. In the women's 1500, somewhat surprisingly, the fastest time in the heats came from Nikki Hiltz of the U.S. They ran a more than 2-second personal best in the heats to really kind of stake their claim as a contender when it comes to the final. And then eventually when it got to the final, you saw the Ethiopian contingent in this race of Ferweni Hailu, Birke Halam, and Deribe Wateji. They led basically the entire race, which is kind of what you would expect, especially because you do see Ethiopians use kind of team tactics in final races a lot. And so they were leading for a large majority of the race until, with about 400 meters left, Emily McKay of the U.S. makes a absolutely massive move, and she just pulls ahead of everyone. And she was ahead by a pretty significant margin. And it really looked for a while like she was going to be able to hang on to this, and she was going to be able to string it out for the win, which would have been wildly impressive. But eventually she did start to lose grasp of it a little bit, and she got passed by both Nikki Hiltz and Ferweni Hailu. Hailu ended up closing this race with final 100-meter splits of 14:97, 14:13, and 14:49, which was a full second faster than the final 300 out of Nikki Hiltz. So it was a very spirited effort from both of the Americans, but ultimately they end up finishing in second and third to the world leader and Ferweni Hailu. But despite this finish, it is absolutely nothing for either of them to hang their heads about, because Despite already dropping a +2 second personal best in the heats, Nikki Hiltz ran another 2 second personal best in this final. And then Emily McKay also ran a 2.5 second personal best almost. So it's not gold, but it's pretty dang close. It's really dang impressive. And how surprising is it that the U.S. won 4 out of 6 medals in the 1500. And that is really just a sign of, I think, how far American distance running has come in the last couple of years. And it is very impressive. And those races were an absolutely wonderful way of wrapping up a phenomenal World Indoor Championships. All right, everyone, that is it. I don't know how long this video is going to end up being, but for those of you that watched the whole thing, thank you so much. This was just such an awesome meet, and there were so many storylines about like in every single event that, like I said, it felt like I would be doing a disservice to leave any event out or not go into enough detail on any event in the depth that it deserved. So I know this ended up being very long, but like I said, I deeply appreciate those of you that watched the whole thing. I did not think it was possible, but this meet has gotten me so much more excited for the outdoor season that is probably going to really start ramping up in the next couple weeks. I know we've got a couple meets that we're hosting here in Gainesville at the end of March, early April that I will be going to and I will be losing my mind over. And then usually around end of April, early May is when you see the Diamond League circuit start picking up. But don't think for a second that we're going to have a little bit of downtime because guess what? We've got NCAA indoors in a week or two. So it's such a great time to be a track and field fan. There's no downtime. There's great races every week. There's great times happening every week. There's great marks happening every week. I love track and field. It is the best sport in the world. And this weekend was such a great example of why that is. With all, and I mean all of that being said, that is it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching once again. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Please follow the Instagram at Paul's Sports Takes. And I will see you guys next time.